The next thing that I want to talk about is kind of the charts and graphs. So we might be doing these a little bit out of order, but charts and graphs in the context of wind. Here's a great pie chart that you can see, who is generating wind power. And I'm actually going to see, kind of between filming this and editing this video, if I can find a more updated figure. This one, like we've seen before, is a little bit stale. So this is 2011, and if we look at our pie diagram, the United States is shown as this kind of horizontal hash mark. It's over here on the right-hand side. It's a pretty significant pie chart for the amount of wind power that we generate as compared to the global balance. China's up there, Germany's up there, Spain, again, India, France. You can see kind of some of the kind of more common countries that we've been talking about. But like I said, I think that it would be interesting to actually take a second and look at how this diagram has changed in comparison with something that's a little bit less stale, 2017, 2018 data. And I'll see if I can put that up. If I can, you'll be looking at it right now. If I can't, I'll just actually edit this out. So there we go. All areas are not equal when it comes to how much wind blows, right? So, if we think about Idaho, why does the wind blow in Idaho? Well, because Utah sucks, right? No. Loading up on the dad jokes. Well, no, let's take a look at this figure and we can see where the wind blows. So it's a little bit chaotic, actually, but if we look at the places that have just like the extreme kind of best conditions to generate wind power, it's in the Central Plains where things are fairly flat, which is kind of similar to what we described with the oceans, right? Having offshore wind. So you can see here, there's this kind of swath through central, kind of the central Midwest, really the kind of flat part of the nation, and that's where we see kind of the best case scenario, which is cool if we kind of think about this in context of solar, right? Solar also had certain parts of the nation that were really kind of best case scenario, and they're not the same ones as wind. So one place, at least in our neck of the woods, that you can't quite see highlighted on this diagram is actually the Columbia River Gorge, right? So there's a narrow kind of canyon excavated by the Missoula flood and the Columbia River, and the wind rips through there. Anyone who's spent some time in spring, had a job for a while working out at the Gorge amphitheater when I was much younger. And we would have to take the stage down every fall because of the winter wind, and we'd have to rebuild it in the spring, and the iron bars would be twisted and torqued because of the amount of wind that would come through there. So significant. But let's zoom in on our neck of the woods, right? Because that's what matters to us, Idaho. So if we look here at Idaho, this diagram is not quite as straightforward as the solar one. We can notice down here in the Snake River Plain, we're kind of in the fair range, but wind can be useful in much more like precise locations, particularly like ridge tops, right? So you may have kind of a narrow little band that's incredibly productive when it comes to wind. And again, if you look closely at this diagram, you can see that up in the Idaho mountains, we do see some of these kind of red or higher, higher quality areas to install wind, and oftentimes those are following ridge lines and things, which again, that itself is going to fold into one of the conversations in the last segment, which is going to be about NIMBY, right? So if you enjoy your pristine backcountry and you're out hiking and you come around a corner and there's a ridge with 15 wind turbines and a road, you're going to be pretty disappointed, although you'll be getting clean energy. So if you've recently driven from Boise to, let's say, Twin Falls or Idaho Falls, Pocatello, you drive kind of out along the Snake River Plain, you've undoubtedly seen some of these new wind installations. There's a really large one kind of between, just to the north of the freeway and outside of Mountain Home. And again, as you continue to drive that I-84 corridor, you'll see new wind farms put in left and right, which, again, this is a kind of thing where if you're a landowner, it's pretty low impact. And actually, this was many years ago. I had a conversation with a geologist who was an ex-geologist out of Colorado. At his job, he had ended up working for an energy company, and his job was to go out and talk to ranchers who run cattle and convince them to install wind turbines, because a wind turbine actually has a really small footprint. And so if you have, 10,000 acres you're running cattle on and it's your land, putting in wind turbines is actually not going to bother the cattle at all. They'll just walk around it. And so you're still running your cattle operation and you're generating power, right? You have an additional source of income. So it can, in the right case and kind of sold the right way, it can be an additional source of income, and it can be something that a private individual would install. So the last thing I want to look at is really two different kind of takes on national wind power. So this first map, this is installed wind capacity, right? So this doesn't relate to the amount of energy generated, but again, you kind of see some similar things, although when we think back to the diagram that showed us places where we have the best possibility for wind, that's not quite matched here, because this includes the human element, right? This includes, where do states promote this? Where are energy companies looking at putting in wind? So if we look at capacity in megawatts, Oregon, Washington, California, they're reasonable. They're fairly high. Famously, in Southern California, kind of inland, not too far from Palm Springs, these famous areas where it's just wind turbine after wind turbine after wind turbine. You can see kind of in the mountainous corridor, right, where we live. So, from Arizona up to Idaho, well, a lot of our state's really rural and inaccessible. So we do have some areas, obviously Snake River Plain and things like that, easy to put in wind turbines. Even though there might be high capacity along a ridge, a lot of times it's just far too expensive to install and maintain them in that condition. You see, Texas is really leading the way in installed capacity, but that also has to do with their area, right? They're very large. So a different take on the last one, this is not necessarily just installed capacity, this is production, right? This is where the rubber meets the road. And for each state, it's shown as a percentage of their overall power generation, which, remember, traditionally has been coal mostly. Natural gas is gaining speed, and oil is really, fairly unchanged. So this is offsetting those traditional sources and essentially carbon neutral, right? We've talked about, carbon production. So again, now we can see in a more real way, along that central corridor of this kind of central Midwest, we see those are the states that are generating, in the 30% range for wind power. Idaho, we're pretty good. Again, one of the things that can kind of help you as a state to look great is if your state doesn't have that many people and doesn't use that much power overall, right? So that is the case with Idaho as compared to California, right? Far more people there. But again, Oklahoma, Kansas, the Dakotas, Iowa, those are the 5 states that are really leading the charge in the context of production, but they're not necessarily leading the charge in installed capacity.